Therapist here. Checking the news is terrible for your mental health. Do it anyway. Okay, this comes up so often and it's so valid. So, today I want us to talk a little bit about why we should be checking the news, even though it has a significant impact on our mental health, what not to do, and how to approach checking the news productively. So, first of all, you might hear from a lot of people, or you might be one of those people who says, checking the news puts me in such a bad mental state that I don't even check the news anymore. I can't look at it. It makes me panic. It makes me anxious. It makes me depressed. And you're right. It does do that. Good on you for noticing the effects that different actions you take are having on your inner peace. Um, However, you have to make a decision between what's more important: protecting your inner peace when there is external genocide, or protecting the people who are going through that external lack of peace. So basically, this is going to be a question of sacrifice. Um, there's definitely ways and measures you can take to minimize the negative impact to your mental health, because this is not about, like, purposely making yourself miserable to show off what a good person you are. You want to be a productive person, and you want to honor your inner peace as much as possible. You want to be a strong person who cultivates that inner strength so that you can be good to yourself and good to others. Um, but right off the bat, we're going to dispel this whole myth that it's acceptable to tune out from the world because the world makes you sad. That's a very privileged position to take. People who are facing genocide right now in Palestine can't tune out from the world. The bombs are falling all around them all the time. The Zionist forces just today bombed the last functional hospital in Gaza City. So it's up to you if you want to have that. You can afford to have your taxes continue to fund this genocide, and you can afford to not look at the genocide while it's happening. Um, but doing that is trying to think of the word for it. And while I think of that word, I'll just I'll put some images on the screen so you don't get bored. uh, let's see, how could I describe what it is when somebody decides to tune out the world outside to protect their own mental health? Hmm. You know what? The word's not coming to me. You can come up with a word for yourself. What do you think? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm being snarky. I Full disclaimer, I was this person for a very long time. I didn't check the news for a very long time because it made me miserable. And the way I justified it was by saying that checking the news would hurt me and it wouldn't help them. Like, if I read about oppression, all that would do is inform me of their misery and make me miserable. But me being miserable isn't helping the people who are oppressed. So that's how I justified tuning out for the longest time. However, that's not entirely true. I hadn't tested that theory. I hadn't, tried reading the news for a sustained period to see if there was actually no productive benefits to reading the news. So let's talk about it, because I think this is valid. Like, you're seeing that, it's weird. You're like, let's say you woke up, it was hard to drag yourself out of bed. You're getting ready for work, and you have to be like a functional human being at work. So before you head out to work, um, you have a few extra minutes. If you use those few extra minutes to check the news, you know that you are going to be instilling into your heart a sadness. And it can be weird because like, we live in this modern era with technology that our brains did not evolve to handle. It's not like seeing the news all around us. and just having to like adapt to it. It's like you're actually in your comfy home making the choice to click on the button to open the news tab, and you know that once you click that button, you're going to feel worse. And it's weird to ask someone to do that. I understand that, and I that's why I didn't do it for such a long time. And I justified it by saying, well, it's not going to help anyone if I'm sad anyway, so what's the point? However, I contend, from what I've learned over this past genocide, when I've become much more, thankfully, aware of what's going on in the world and much more actively involved in it, the more you check the news, the more you become the news. You start to actively participate in the world around you. Uh, because here's the thing: as soon as you start reading the news, it's going to put a burden into your heart. That burden will not be relieved until you act to relieve it. And that sounds like a bad thing, but that's actually exactly what's needed right now. So you choose to put a burden into your heart, and that makes Palestine your problem, which it is your problem if you live in the United States and your taxes are funding the genocide. It's your problem, whether you know about it or not. But once you know about it, you feel that it's your problem. And now you have this burden that's not going to leave your heart until you do take action, until you start praying to God from the heart, until you start going out there, protesting, boycotting, donating, doing everything you can all the time, and becoming an active participant in the history that you see unfolding all around you. Maybe to the extent that you literally become the news, you might find yourself in the photos, in the headlines, as you increasingly become more actively involved in the protests, in the movements that we are seeing around the world that have inspired so many people. So anytime someone's like coming from a helpless position of, oh, what can we do? What can we do? Stop asking that rhetorically. You can do a lot, but you don't have the motivation to do anything because you're shutting it out. If you let it in, yes, it will hurt you. But you know what? There's a different type of hurt that you are exposing yourself to right now, which is the awareness that horrible things are going on, but you're keeping a distance from them, which is basically making the active decision to numb yourself and to live that life numbly. Are you really enjoying the movies you're watching and the video games you're playing and all of the ways you're spending your free time, knowing that there's horrors going on and that some people are dedicating their lives to stopping them and you aren't? I'm not saying it's wrong to have fun. I have fun too. But I'm not saying it's wrong to rest. In Islam, we say your body has a right upon you, just as God has a right upon you. You should be taking care of yourself. You should be taking care of your mental health. But when you hear about like you look at some people and they're like, oh, what can we do? It's all so hopeless. Or they even direct their anger toward God. It's like you're the one who's doing nothing. Why are you upset when you're the one being tested? This genocide is a test for us all, the people going through it, the people committing it, the people silently watching on the sidelines. So you should be angry at the wrongdoers, and if you're doing nothing, you should be angry at yourself. Just last night I was watching Omar Suleiman interview one of the doctors, the incredibly brave people who go to Gaza on repeated medical missions. Like, they don't mind knowing that they will very likely be murdered by Israel. They go and they go and they go, and they get very sad if they're not allowed to go again. And they go full well knowing that this might be it for them. Hopefully, istishhad, better than being, the fate of many doctors in Gaza, sadly, that they will be kidnapped by Zionists and tortured to death in military prisons. So dying is not even the worst fate that could happen to them. And still they go. And still they go and they expose themselves to the airstrikes, and they expose themselves to starvation, and they expose themselves to the extreme trauma of witnessing firsthand the disfigured children whose faces have been blown off and all of this horrific stuff. So it's like their mental health would be far better if they went on a vacation instead of going to Gaza. But they're not asking what can they do. They are doing, and they're dedicating their lives to doing. And that's a very high standard. I'm not out here saying we all have to do that. I have not done that. And may Allah forgive us all for our shortcomings and guide us to do and be better. But just start. Just take those little mini steps every day. And those start with reading the news. That's why I really want to focus on this topic today. Because how does someone go from living their own comfortable, privileged life to being willing to travel to the war zone, the genocide zone, and give their life up for other people who might die anyway. How do you go from point A to point B? It's by reading the news. That's where it begins. It begins with um, being willing to let the hardships into your heart, an awareness of what's going on. Let it into your heart. Once you start doing that, you're going to walk down this path of, oh man, I have to do something about this. So you're going to go from what can we do about this to I have to do something about this. And I think that's why a lot of us don't like to check the news, because we know that if we read about what's happening every day, we won't sit by silently. And that's why we avoid the news. We're like, oh, I don't want to have to do something about this. It's like taking the ignorance is bliss path. So you can do that. Like, if that's your choice, just know that you're making it actively, even if it feels passive. And I believe we will be held accountable for these choices we make, because our silence is affecting Palestine and our voices affect Palestine. So it's up to you, what you want, what path you want to take. But the helplessness I hear from people around who are just wanting to live their lives and not be bothered, I no longer find it acceptable. And I recognize myself in that helplessness. And I want to move away from that. And I encourage all of us to move away from that. Stop asking, what can we do? Start saying, I have to do something, because you can do something, even if it's little, consistent daily deeds. Check the news, do dua, engage in boycott, um, protest and rally and spread awareness. And it's all like, no one's going to save the world by themselves. But do you want to be a drop in the bucket of goodness, or do you want to be flowing along the river of having nothing to do with this story that is unfolding? When people always ask, like, what would you do if you were alive during the Holocaust? What would you do if you were alive during the genocide of the indigenous people in the United States, or witnessing slavery in the United States, or any of the atrocities across history? We are witnessing an atrocity right now, and whatever you're doing right now is telling you what your response is. It's like that post that went around, like, what would you do during those time periods? You're doing it right now. For most people who are not directly affected by oppression, it's much, much, much easier and more natural to sit this one out, right? And like, even it's like your brain punishes you for trying to do something about, trying to learn about the oppression. It feels terrible. Like, you might feel miserable after you read about the horrors, and like, in order to like calm yourself, you might want to step away. So let's talk, now that we've talked a lot about why we should still check the news and kind of refuted some of the arguments against checking the news, because I think it all begins with checking the news. Now let's talk about how not to do it and avoiding going too far with checking the news. So here's what I mean by that. Some people check the news so often that they fall into despair. And partly that's because of the way they're consuming it, and also frequency can be a problem. So for me personally, I like to check the news twice a day, once in the morning and once at night. And the reason I do that is basically it allows me, it's like digestible, and I don't miss anything. So I can go to sleep, and when I wake up, I read about what happened while I was sleeping, and then go to work or live my life, have my day, and then at the end of the day, I read about what happened while I was living my day. So it's like I'm always aware of what's happening. Even if I'm not aware throughout the day, I'll be able to catch up with the news at the end of the day, and I'll be able to connect it all together and have this like cohesive narrative running alongside my life of what's happening in, like, meanwhile in Palestine. So that works for me. A different thing might work for you. I found it to be a good balance of like still being able to live my life, and being able to be a strong person who can hopefully affect change, but not being like completely distracted and unplugged. I'm like daily engaged and aware. I don't let a day go by that I don't know what's going on. And this, again, I'm developing a lot of these habits more and more recently. I was not like this at all before. Actually, at the beginning of the genocide, the way I would do it was I wouldn't read the news. I would watch the news. And when I say watch, I mean literally like clips on YouTube of atrocities, like little short clips that I didn't decide to seek out. They would just pop up in my algorithm, and then I'd feel guilty, and then I'd like force myself to click on one, and then it would make me very sad. And that's what I did for a while. And then it's like, even that, it, so like some people, they like the fact that I was consuming it passively. And some people consume it so often, like it might be playing in their household morning to night, and this is because of their love for Palestine. But it can put a person in a state of despair, especially in terms of like psychological impact on your brain. It can put you into a state of helplessness, especially if you have a very empathetic heart, because you're taking on everyone's tragedy and trauma, but you're not just witnessing one person's trauma, you're witnessing them back to back to back. So let's say this person had the worst day of their life. Their husband was like, if you see a woman in a clip about the atrocities in Palestine, and she's sobbing, she's just found out that her husband has been martyred. And you're watching and you're sobbing along with her as if you were her, like imagining what that would be like. You're witnessing like the worst day of her life, right? And then you scroll or you click on something else and you see like a father sobbing that his baby boy has died of starvation. And then you scroll and you see, like, so you can keep seeing different like horrors. Oh, this person like will never walk again, limbs dismembered from an Israeli airstrike. You know, you keep scrolling, and you see like this person's like extreme horror tragedy, this person's extreme horror tragedy, this person. And you're like taking it all in as if it's all happening like to you, back to back to back. Whereas each person is dealing with their one story, their one trauma, and that's going to be their life. When we watch all of that back to back to back, um, and we're like, well, I'm just watching, they're the ones living through it, I need to watch more and more and more. No, you it's good to watch enough that you are emotionally attached, so far as the emotional attachment helps you act to help people, because it's not necessarily your tears that are helpful to them, it's your prayers, it's your actions. So the emotions help motivate you. If you're taking on so much and it's like almost unnatural, like you're taking on so much of other people's despair collectively, like they're not taking on everyone's despair collectively. Each person is living their life, their hardship. So don't go collecting like every little thing that you're seeing and like forcing yourself to watch like these really traumatizing clips back to back to back all the time. Some people might only read the news and not watch it because they know that if they watched it, it would like make them feel such despair, but they want to stay informed enough to care enough to keep praying and keep acting from the heart, like to be aware and to be plugged in. So it's up to you. You think about what moves you and what motivates you and what demotivates you. If you're feeling despair, like you're really feeling you've lost sight of the bigger picture and you don't feel moved, you feel helpless, that's a sign that your habits are not working for you. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So don't be just as you shouldn't ignore the news, you also shouldn't be a passive consumer of the news or a guilt ridden consumer of the news who's like forcing yourself to click and scrolling mindlessly and like just taking in all this trauma until you like numb yourself to it. So really find what works for you. You should establish your own routine. And I really think the best, most effective routine for staying informed, keeping your heart attached but not living in despair and like flooding yourself with everyone's struggles, is by having those small consistent check-ins. Might be once a day, might be twice a day, might even be at the end of your like busy work week or something. Whatever makes the most sense for you depending on your position, and like experiment with different habits, but include it in part of your routine, and see where you want to draw the lines. In conclusion, you are what you consume. When you consume the news, you become the news. If you consume too much of it, you might fall into despair. If you don't consume enough of it, you will be completely disengaged from the people who need you to act, who are depending on you to act. So you find that balance. Um, this might be a little bit beyond the scope of this video, but I just wanted to briefly mention at the end, when it comes to how to be productive about approaching the news, in terms of what sources to check. I talked a little bit about text versus video. You know, if you're feeling really detached, watching some videos might help you feel like you're there. If you feel overly traumatized by the footage, switching back to text might help you just like take in that information and be able to synthesize it in a way that's productive, spreading that information to others. Um, what sources do you check? Uh, this is the part that maybe is a little beyond the scope of this video, but I will just briefly say that considering the fact that the Western Empire is committing the genocide, I would be very wary of checking mainstream Western media sources. Their job is to manufacture consent for the genocide. Um, there are some very excellent English language sources for people out there. I'm partial to Middle East Eye, but whatever source you check should have an explicit like anti-genocide stance. News can't be neutral. If news tries to claim that it's neutral, then it's the least neutral of all. Every news, like every journalist has a story to tell, and every news agency is funded by a certain group of people who have certain like political motivations or interests. So again, going into the idea of not consuming the news passively, um, who is your favorite news organization funded by? What politics are they trying to advance? So in this era, if you're trying to learn more about the genocide in Palestine, don't watch sources that validate that genocide, that use the word conflict instead of genocide, trying to justify and minimize and deny so that they can or try to present like this, you know, false equivalence, both sides type of narrative, even though the situation is clear. There's an oppressor, there's an oppressed. If you watch news made by the oppressor for the oppressor, you're going to hear a very different story. And then you're going to be worse than uninformed. You're going to be misinformed. So, you know, look for sources that make that clear stance of our agenda is in line with the, like if you read like human rights organizations reports, and even human rights organizations, some of them are like they can have a bit of a Western empire, like pro-Western imperialism stance to them. Like they're not neutral either. But even still, if their whole job is human rights, they're going to generally be able to give you some reports that are accurate. So seeing like what are human rights organizations saying, and then seeing which news agencies are reporting in accordance with that. So, human rights organizations are overwhelmingly saying Israel is committing genocide in Palestine. Which news organizations, therefore, are reporting on that genocide, using the word genocide and giving clear daily updates of what's happening, not overly sensationalized updates focusing on one day in human history, but constant, like what happened today, what happened the next day. And that's those are just some quick tips of how to find out who is telling the truth. um, Lots more to say, but I'll end it there for now. Thank you so much for watching. May Allah protect all of the people who are facing the genocide, fighting the genocide, the amazing doctors who go out there. May Allah open up the borders and allow people to access clean water and food. And we continue our fight. May Allah guide us and motivate us to do what we can and accept from us and from the people who are suffering, and increase them in the best of this life and the next. Ameen ya Rab. Assalamu alaikum.